or talk like him. But I want to talk this morning about what I call the boy crisis. The boy crisis. And I really do believe we are on the front end of a real tsunami of problems in our society because of what's happening with young men and boys. And so this morning I'm going to try to move through I'm not going to do tons of data, but there is tons of data. So if you're the kind of guy or woman that is data driven and you want to see the numbers, there's a lot out there being published by sociologists and psychologists and theology people, just the data coming in about what's happening with young men. And Rich, you're right, it is alarming. Things are changing for our young men. And it's a lot different than when even I'm 48 now, and I still think I'm like one of them. I have it shifted in my head, but it's different. It's different now. So I do have some pictures up here just to try to keep you organized with me, so I don't lose my place. They may be for me as much as anyone. But Rich mentioned I work at Deerfoot, and we have this mission to build godly men. And we think, it's been going for 85 years, okay, so a long time, 1930 this started. And the founder of Deerfoot, Alfred Coons, who was a brethren elder down in this area, he wrote, I was reading some things that he wrote on a piece of paper, just his memoirs of why he started Deerfoot. And one of the things he said was he was concerned in the 1920s about the feminization of boys. I mean, now I can imagine that language today in our society, but it's hard to imagine that in the 1920s, but those were his words. He was aware of things that were happening, and he wanted to build a community that would teach young men what it means to be a godly man, and he wanted some of the qualities to be a rugged masculinity, where guys learn to work hard and to live in community, and that's what Deerfoot's been doing for 85 years. So as I share some of this with you, I want to just this morning what I want to share is why we think that mission is so important today, what drives me today. And I feel more urgency about it than ever because of some of what I'm reading and seeing. I want to make some disclaimers. I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist or any kind of ologist. Nothing makes me an expert. But I am somebody who's watching and experiencing this culture, and I have my antenna up, and I'll just share some of what I am learning and thinking. And I wanted to let you know that there's a lot of room for discussion here, so you may disagree with some of what I say. That's okay. What I want is to at least discuss stuff. At least we're thinking and being aware, and we may have disagreements on what something means, but what concerns me mostly, especially in the churches that I experience, that many are not even discussing the issues. They're not aware of what's happening, and that's a dangerous place. All right, so the problem. See, can we get stuff on the screen? All right, yeah. So I'm going to try to keep this going. I've already made my disclaimers. Here's the problem: men and boys, they are falling off the radar. They are declining in all the important places of our culture. I know that last night I had the screen up here. Can I do that again? That would be great. Then I don't have to turn around. Oh, that's all I need to do? I'm capable of that. Great. Great. Thank you. This church is awesome. You have all the technology. And I can tell you've done a lot of facelifts up around here. Last time I was here, I just noticed immediately last night with Rich that this has changed. The problem is the demise of men in all the important areas of life. Now, what are those areas? I mean, if you want to talk education, talk the workplace, the church, the family, the culture. Men are struggling. All the data is showing this. It's widely recognized by sociologists. And if you're familiar with TED Talks, these are, you can find these on the internet. I love TED Talks. Very interested. They're basically comments on what's happening in society or culture. There's a whole lot about what's happening with boys. I encourage you to check out some of the TED Talks about the demise of men. Let me share some evidence. I'm going to try to move quickly on this. There's a professional decline. The workplace has changed dramatically over the last 100 years. I think we all know that. And I'm speaking mostly here in America, but this is probably true in the country you come from. It's really true in most countries, but certainly in America. And there is a lot of good news. There are not the same biases and discrimination that there once was in the workplace. Nobody wants that. That's terrible. But some of the other notable changes is that men are losing their place as leaders in the workplace. They're also losing their place as leaders in other areas in life. Men are declining educationally and developmentally. Men's literacy is declining rapidly. Get this, boys make up about 2/3 of students labeled as learning disabled today. 2/3 are boys. For every 100 women enrolled in college today, there are 77 men enrolled. And that ratio is even higher on Christian college campuses. Very interesting. You think about social development. For every 100 women ages 18 to 21 in correctional facilities in jail, there are 1,400 men. The prisons are loaded with men. Leonard Sachs is an interesting author. If you ever want to read somebody, just find any of his books. Leonard Sachs, S-A-X. He contends that the measurable decline of boys in the last 20 years is just staggering. This is a quote. From kindergarten to college, they're less resilient, less ambitious than they were a mere 20 years ago. In fact, 1/3 of men ages 22 to 34 are still living at home with their parents, about 100% increase in the past 20 years. That's from his book, Boys Adrift. The subject of kids and medication is huge. And this is something I experienced at camp when boys come to camp. Last year, out of about 600 campers, 200 came with prescribed medications. That's 1/3 of our campers are on prescribed medications. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal, So Young and So Many Pills, that talked about 25% of kids and teens in taking prescription meds, and most of those are boys. The moral decline, the family. In 1960, 5.8 American kids lived in single-parent homes. That's still a lot. But today, that has more than tripled. 18 million. 40% of our children do not live in the same home as their biological father in America today. Based on data, a couple who gets married today has a 50% chance of divorcing, whether or not they are Christians. I think that's the interesting point, whether or not they are Christians. The breakdown of the family, in my opinion, is the single greatest social issue of our time. This is the issue. It's the ripple effect of it is affecting everything. And it's no wonder that young adults today are delaying marriage to their late 20s, even early 30s. They've been trained to understand that they're on their own in life. And that's how they live. In a world where marriage is so unreliable, living together makes perfect sense and is a lot less complicated than marriage from a young person's viewpoint. Of course, we know that's not true from a biblical viewpoint, but that's part of our challenge. Let me just say a few words about pornography and sexual addictions. The data here is absolutely staggering and overwhelming. It's a $12 billion industry in the U.S. $12 billion. That's a lot of money. In a survey of Promise Keepers, so this would go back to the 90s, that's a bit dated, but in a survey of Promise Keepers, 53% admitted to viewing pornography within the week of the Promise Keeper rally, within that very week. According to pastors.com, I never knew there was such a site, but there's a pastors.com, 54% of pastors said they viewed pornography in the past year. These are our shepherds. 54%. A study of the sociology department at University of Virginia found that hotel owners report that hotel pornography use either equaled or increased when Christian conferences used the hotel. I mean, that just gives me chills. That gives me a nauseous feeling. This is not openly talked about because there's so much shame and it's an uncomfortable subject, but this is big. if this is true, this is big. The average age a child sees porn is 11 years old now in our society. So there is an epidemic of sexual perversion and addiction emerging in our young people, and that's startling. Let's just talk for a minute about church decline. I know I'm really bringing you down, but there's going to be hope. Church decline. Typical U.S. congregation draws in an adult crowd of 60% female, 40% male. This is just sort of national statistics. That gender gap is showing up in all the age categories. The Sunday, this particular Sunday, right now in America, almost 25% of married church-going women will be at the worship service without their husbands. I have no idea what that means in this particular congregation, but I know from my church, I have no trouble believing these statistics. Midweek activities often draw 70 to 80% female participants. The majority of church employees are women, except for ordained clergy, which are overwhelmingly male, according to the data. Over 70% of the boys who are being raised in the church will abandon it during their teens and 20s, and many will never return. Get that. 70% will disappear sometime during college or their 20s and not come back. Fewer than 10% of U.S. churches are able to establish or maintain a vibrant men's ministry. David Murrow's book, Why Men Hate Going to Church, may get you mad in a lot of ways, but it's worth discussing and thinking some of what he's saying. I struggled with that book, but then I thought, I'm glad I read that. It stirred some thinking for me. Let's talk for a minute about some outcomes of all of this. We just tried to define the problem. Some of the outcomes is we have a time when boys are stunted in their growth and development. Boys often today will retreat into virtual worlds of online gaming or online relationships, and it's often all-consuming. I read this article within the last year. Some of you may be familiar with the virtual reality fantasy worlds that are out there, like Second Life. I don't know if you've ever heard of Second Life, where you can actually create an image, an icon, an avatar, who lives in an online community with other people who create avatars. There are people, believe it or not, actually making a living off this. You can purchase Second Life real estate with real money, but it's virtual land. There's an actual Second Life economy. Now, if you feel like that's a little weird, it is. But here's one that's even worse. I read this article that this was a divorce case. The accusation was adultery after the wife discovered the husband's character in his avatar in Second Life had a relationship with another woman in Second Life, all virtual. Real people virtually relating. This was a real live divorce case. The accusation was adultery. Does that get complicated? Yeah. But that illustrates to me what we're dealing with now. Things aren't black and white anymore. There's a lot of strange new categories and gray areas. Young men often get stuck, especially after college, and the so-called fail to launch into meaningful work or relationships. The failure to launch that I see quite often is for the staff I work with. Many of these are gifted, strong, talented, well-educated young men, even with strong families, and they are paralyzed for the next step after college. They don't know what to do. And it's really, for me, it's been sort of mind-blowing because I think they have so many things they could do, but they're stuck. And that's part of the stunted growth and development. They need direction. They need help. The so-called hookup culture. This may be language, if you're older, you've not heard before, but I can guarantee young people know what I'm talking about. The hookup culture is a way of life in high school and college, where people just sort of have romantic or sexual liaisons that have no commitment at all. No commitment at all. They're just at a party, they meet up, and something happens, and then they go on. They hook up. There are even websites or apps that now help you hook up with people. Well, this hookup culture, which is really described in detail, in disturbing detail in this book, Guidelands, which our board read. And I want to tell you something. If you decide to read this book, it's very graphic. It's disturbing. It's disturbing, but it is expressing a reality that I know I needed to understand. I wish it wasn't, but it's true. And we read it as a board at Deerfoot, and I think it really disturbed a lot of us. But it's described in detail what the implication of that. And the implication is men not knowing how to enter into real relationships. Real relationships, and that is a big problem. The media betrayal of men has changed dramatically. These are old-time TV shows that some of you may or may not be familiar with. The Leave It to Beaver, Andy Griffith, and yes, they were caricatures of a fantasy of what dads might be like. I'm not trying to say that they ever really reflected reality, but here's what they did. They valued honorable values. They valued honorable values. And so, even Bill Cosby, his show, you had a positive role model as dad. Today it is very hard to find a sitcom or TV show with a positive male role model. These are even dated shows, most of these. You probably never had Homer Simpson in your church up on the screen before, but he has become the epitome of the stereotype of a dad. It's always, the sitcom formula today is often an empowered, successful, sharp woman married to a doofus of a husband. This is how, think of it. Just go through your mind. The male is always still in his adolescence, still just a teenager who can't do anything right, and she's the one who's always leading the way and shaking her head and rolling her eyes because he's such a doofus. Well, this formula is throughout our media. You can see it everywhere. You'd be hard-pressed to find anything else. And that is having a major impact on boys and men. Major impact. Gender confusion is huge today. I just had lunch with a fellow from State University of New York, SUNY Albany, and he was trying to explain to me that there is a huge difference between gender and sex. So you may be male and female, but that doesn't imply your gender. And I was getting very confused in this, and I think he was being very confused, but basically he was making a case for transgender thinking, that they're not changing their sex, they're changing their gender. Well, they're breaking down words and categories, and we've come to tremendous amount of gender confusion. There used to be a skit back on Saturday Night Live, It's Pat, if you remember that, and the whole deal was nobody could figure out if Pat was male or female. And it was funny, and it was a joke. But now it's no joke. Nobody's laughing anymore. So recent Dancing, what's that show, Dancing with the Stars, featured Chaz Bono, who is a woman who became a man, and she was one of the stars of Dancing with the Stars. This is a big deal, the gender confusion. We don't know who we are anymore. We don't understand our identity. The whole sense of personhood, definitely biblical understanding of personhood, has gone out the window, and it's bringing a huge amount of problem. Narcissism is a big part of America, and just consider this, the development of magazine titles through the years. Back in the 50s, there was the magazine Life. Everybody liked the magazine Life. And then came out the magazine People, became much more tabloid-oriented. Eventually we got the magazine Us. We're getting more personal. Now we have a magazine called Self. Have you noticed the progression? As we're getting more and more self-interested and self-absorbed. I don't know what the next step is. You know, the magazine of me, myself, and I, only me, or whatever. But we love ourselves, but we don't. But we love pleasure, and we love to bring pleasure to ourselves. America is a narcissistic society. Coddling from an early age in schools. Boys are taught at a young age that they can be and do anything. Now that is, I want boys to feel, the healthy ambition and not to feel held back. And when I see a boy that says, "Oh, I can't do that," I want to say, "Yeah, you can. Go for it. Do it. Try it." And that's a philosophy I have at Deerfoot. Try it. You may not succeed, but you're good. You've done well for trying, and that's wonderful. But what has happened is we've coddled our boys in schools and others. It's driven them to be. We've driven into them that they are unique and special, and they should dream big, and then they do. And what has happened is when boys get out of college, because they think they're special and they ought to be dreaming big, many are not willing to settle for things like entry-level jobs or settle for hard work, getting your foot in the door, because they've been taught, "I'm special." Now one thing, there's a lot of data that implies this. For one, today when a young couple buys a home, when my parents bought a home, the idea was to buy something you could afford, the so-called starter home, and then you would buy up, and as your family grew, maybe you'd expand or you'd get a bigger house. Most young couples today, data shows, are looking for a home that equals or surpasses the home they grew up in as their first home. And because of how mortgages work, they sometimes can pull that off. They get into huge debt buying a bigger home than they should. There was a time when it was normal for boys to aspire to what was the typical, if you said to an 8-year-old, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" What would be a typical answer? Like, let's say if you said that in the 50s. A fireman, a policeman, an army man. What they would aspire to are their perceived heroes of society. There was honor in that. Today, if you ask an 8 or 10-year-old boy, a typical 8 or 10-year-old, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" What do you think the answers will be? And you can test me on this. You find them and ask them. They want to be a rock star? Most will say, "I want to be an athlete," because those are royalty. They want to be, the Kobe Bryant, the next Kobe Bryant, the next LeBron James, because that's royalty in our society. You have it all. With both the guys and the girls. To them that's royalty, and you've got it all. And so now this whole way of thinking, it used to be, like when I was young, I wanted to be an astronaut and a professional hockey player. Right? I wanted to be both of those things. And I thought I could pull that off. But then reality set in. And I realized I'm not going to be either of those things. I have no chance of being either of those things. But what is God calling me into life? Well, that next step, that transition, isn't happening very often to people, where reality is setting in and they're thinking, what is God calling me to do? And then when they're faced with real jobs, like insurance, accounting, construction, they're back to this narcissistic view, but I'm special. I don't want to do something normal. I want to be a star. And this is hurting us, this worldview. And it's not coming from Scripture, it's coming from the world. It's coming from the world. It's hard to know if all these outcomes are outcomes of the problem or causes of the problem. I think you could debate either way. I'm trying to click here. There we go. What do we do about it? First, I think we have to look within and identify the real problem. Men are both victims of the problems, but we're also the cause of the problem. Victim mindset can get you in trouble big time, really quickly. We are also the cause of our problem. And it's not new. I think we are where we are because of the failure of men to lead as they should, historically. Men not passing on godly leadership toward young men, it has an impact. But its impact isn't till years later, and that's what we're feeling, the impact of failure of leadership. And if men's failure to lead is not a new problem. In fact, I think I see it right there in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 3, the fall. So let me read this. I put up the NLT, but all the translations say it the same way. The woman was convinced. She was convinced of what the serpent was saying, that the fruit was good and it wasn't going to ruin her relationship. She was actually convinced that God was holding out on her. That's what the serpent convinced her of. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. And so, we're like, oh, man, the women, they just blew it. They blew it for us all, those terrible women, right? No, listen. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and she ate it too. You know what strikes me on this is not what Eve did, it's what Adam did not do. It was the silence of Adam, which Larry Crabb has a book just by that title. It's a very good book. It was the silence of Adam, the huge failure of the man in this moment to say something. He never said anything. He just stood there. His passive leadership was part of the original fall. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be silent anymore. Eve gets the rap when people have a chauvinistic thinking. But where was Adam? He was standing right there. And that sin is played out over and over and over again throughout history. I'm convinced that men need to step forward and stand up and speak out for what is right. Men need to reclaim their calling in Scripture to lead their homes and love their wives as Jesus loved the church. That is a radical, self-sacrificing kind of love. That is not a domineering, chauvinistic kind of love. Wives are called to submit to their husbands in Ephesians 5, and many women I know cringe at such a notion. They just get annoyed at it. But it's because their understanding of submission and understanding of being led is shaped by a chauvinistic experience in the world. But if they were really loved like Jesus loves them, I don't know anybody, including me, who wouldn't love to submit to that kind of leadership. And I say to men sometimes, if you want your wife to submit and respect you like Ephesians 5 calls her to, then try loving her like Jesus loved the church. Because that's the kind of leadership, and that's the kind of love we all of us submit to. And Ephesians 5 does call us submit to one another in verse 21. Men, you and I are not the victims here. We actually can be the cause. Not just the cause of the failure, but we can also be the cause of the hope. We need to step up and lead. Christian community in general, the church and parachurch, come on, there we go. We need to recover, I just talked about that, recovering a biblical understanding of male and female. The Christian community in general, we need a community that is recognizing the unique and important needs of young boys and pouring into them and raising up a generation of godly men. And I don't know that many churches are doing that. And this is a sidebar, and I won't go down the road, but personally I'm convinced that the way you disciple a young man is different than the way you disciple a young woman. And most of our youth programs just put them all together. And sometimes by necessity, because we don't feel like we have personnel to separate. But when you get them separate, and this is the value of like a single gender camp like Deerfoot, which we love, when you separate out the boys, the way you call them to the life of Christ, there are distinctives that are unique to young men that you need to talk about that you would not necessarily talk about with women and young girls. And most churches do not recognize those distinctives, and that's causing a problem. We need to call men to the cause of Christ. Men and boys are desperately longing to be a part of something that matters. And so today, what's celebrated in our society, that's why they want to be the professional athletes, because that's what in society seems to matter, because that gets the headlines. But when you think about real cause, a real cause that's worth living for and dying for, is there anything that can even come close to the cause of Christ. There is nothing. I mean, we have the cause, and boys are missing it. We need to call them to that cause. You guys probably, maybe you know the story of the great explorer Shackleton and the Endurance. It's one of my favorite stories. Happened in the 20s, and it would be more known if it weren't for the fact that World War I hit at the same time, and that whole story got buried in the paper. But when Ernest Shackleton was trying to recruit his men of explorers that were going to go down to the Antarctic and do something that no one's ever done before, cross the Antarctic, he put an article in the London Times or whatever major paper was there, and the advertisement basically said, "I'm looking for men to do this great voyage." And he wrote, "In case of success, there'll be glory and honor. Promise of safe return, doubtful." And so the question is, who would sign up for something that says, "Yeah, this would be great, but I can't, your chances of returning are pretty slim"? The word is that he got 5,000 applications for that ad. Why would 5,000 people apply to that? Because that struck the heart of what most men long for. To do something, yeah, it's going to be hard, it's going to be risky, but this is going to matter. People are tired of just living like on the rat race, day in, day out, without making any real difference. The cause of Christ is what drives me. It's what makes me want to live, and it's what I'm ready to die for. Every other cause in this world, I have trouble getting excited for. I'm a Giants fan, and believe me, that is a cause not worth following. You guys know that. But there aren't many. You just keep disappointing you. So a word about, and this is a hymn that I love, and we sing this at Deerfoot. "Rise up, O men of God, have done with lesser things." That's the call. That's a call we're shouting at Deerfoot. Put down the lesser things. Give heart and mind and soul and strength to serve the King of Kings. And that's an awesome song. I'm guessing you guys sing that here. It's not in your hymnal? Are you serious? I know a hymn that you don't? Let the record show. Let the record show. Okay, Deerfoot. Just a couple words about Deerfoot. We're trying to be an antidote to this culture. And so here's just a few things of how we do it. I have 4 slides here. One is we are serious about spiritual impact. So Deerfoot is all about relationships, and discipleship is not, in my opinion, based on getting the right information into the heads of other people. Discipleship happens through relationship. It's not information download, it's relationship. And if you look at all the calls that Paul and the other apostles wrote in the epistles, they're all based on relationship, how you live and interact and love one another. It strikes me that there's just not a whole lot of, make sure this doctrine is taught, that these points. I'm not saying doctrine is small, but doctrine is technical, it's abstract unless it's lived in relationship. So we're about relationship at Deerfoot. And the relationships that build at Deerfoot, they go deep and they go long through life. That's another reason we have a 2-week session, so we can build relationships. We are unplugged at Deerfoot. Most of you have some sort of electronic gizmo that you use to connect with people, whether it's the phone, email, Facebook, chatting, whatever. None of that works at Deerfoot. We put it all away. You know what that means is all the relationships have to be face-to-face, real-time. There's no mass email, I copied this to you and that kind of thing. So I have to talk to you first person. Nobody gets to edit their, what's the Facebook thing, their icon, make sure that it's a good picture. I don't know how many of you use Facebook. I know the young people do because you're smiling. I know you do. When you put a Facebook, when young people upload their Facebook pictures, do you know how much energy they go through to make sure it's a good picture? They're not going to get a bad picture. Am I right? You girls know that, right? But in real life, you can't edit who you are. this is me. And that brings a genuineness, a truthfulness, a depth to relationships. We live together at camp, so we like that we're unplugged. We're a wilderness camp that is deep in the woods, and we celebrate challenges. So we like to work hard. We like to push ourselves. The no pain, no gain kind of mantra is something that's true at Deerfoot. It does not mean that you have to be super strong, the most amazing athlete, and you've got to be, the guy, or else you'll never survive. No, we just want people from wherever they are in life to push themselves further. So we're trying to call men to not be a couch potato, but be a guy who steps up and goes after it. So we do things like running. I mean, unless you're a runner, you hate running. That's the way I understand. You could be a cross-country runner, it's fine. The rest of us do it because we think it's helpful, but we don't like it. But you know what I think about running, and you probably can tell I'm definitely not a runner, but I do run. What I like about it is it makes me push myself, and I never want to lose the drive to keep going further. And so I want to keep memorizing Scripture. Does anybody here enjoy memorizing Scripture? I've never met the person who enjoys it. And I've never met the person who it just happens easily and naturally, although there are people with a photographic memory, and I'm definitely not that. People who memorize Scripture push themselves because they know that when you hide God's Word in your heart, it makes you stronger to fight sin, that you might not sin against Him. I know that from first-person experience. It's why I memorize Scripture. We're trying to grow men who will push themselves and not just be passive in terms of managing and leading themselves, their own inner man. Sure, 3012 is a optional club you can do at Deerfoot, and basically it's 3,000 push-ups, memorizing 12 verses in the 2-week session. And it's about 250 push-ups a day. And for some that's easy, for some that's hard. But the 12 verses, memorizing, for some that's easy, and for some that's hard. And I don't know, I'm looking, I guess we don't have any Deerfoot campers in here, but you get a red shirt that says 3012, and it's kind of fun. You can do it all summer if you want. The staff, 15,060. And so those are just weird things that we like to do. If you go to Deerfoot, you see guys dropping like randomly to do push-ups. And I've had to actually train my staff to say, look, when you go out in the public, and if you just don't drop and do push-ups in the middle of Walmart or wherever you are, or in the movie theater, because people just think that's weird. They don't understand. They think you're showing off or whatever, and they're like, well, I got to get my sets in. I'm like, I'll figure out another way. And so I actually remember as a young man doing push-ups in the back of a station wagon. I know I was unbuckled, yes. In the back of a station wagon doing sets as we were driving back to camp because I needed to make up sets, and so that's funny. All right, so I think that's enough talking for me. I don't know if I've made much sense, but I do want to ask, open it up for you to ask any questions you want. Let's discuss a little bit of some of this.
You have this organization in one part of the United States. Have you ever thought about taking it to other places so that people or churches in other areas also can duplicate or replicate what you have found it is good?
Yeah. The answer is yes. Have we done it? No. Have we thought about it? Yes. And actually we're thinking about it now. I'll just be perfectly candid. I think the fear we have is that it just won't succeed. And maybe that's a fear that should not hold us back, but what God has done at Deerfoot is unusual. I'm in the camp industry, so I know a lot about the other Christian camps, and I can't find any other Christian camp that has a story like Deerfoot's where it has had the blessing and success. I don't want to assume that if we just try this again in Arizona, it's going to happen. But here's what I do believe. And were you Sam? Was that your name?
No, my name is Georgie.
Georgie. Okay. I've met a lot of Sams this morning. Is there a lot of Sams here? Okay.
Well, we only have one Georgie.
Okay. I know there were multiple Sams, so that was my best shot. Okay. No, the needs in, I'm saying Arizona just not because we have a plan there, just I'm guessing, all right, so that's just random. But the needs for boys in Arizona they may be slightly distinct for that part of the country, but they're basically the same thing. So what God is doing up at Deerfoot, there needs to be more of. It needs to be reached out there, and it needs to be reached. We can't, I don't know yet, and I'm really asking the Lord to lead this, because I need a leading from Him, but I don't know if we're supposed to be a catalyst and an encouragement to other camps that already exist to start being more focused on this issue, or if we're supposed to actually create something new. And that is literally an active subject of prayer these days. We talked about it yesterday, so your question is very relevant.
Actually, this aspect that we have been studying, so that matter of concern for me also for very long time back. I never thought there would be anyone who would put it as an issue like that. I'm very well with you on that one. I like that people say to man up. There's a saying for man up. I think there's a need of man up. What I will do is I will ask you a question, and if you cannot answer it now in public, if you could tell me personally, that will be
okay. I'd be glad to.
So the question is, all these issues like that. If you can bring one root cause, it could be a wonderful. I would like to, if not in the public, you can tell me later. I want to know it. That is the same as I am doing.
Yeah.
That is one thing. But apart from that, that's why you are keeping that in mind. About this Ephesians, 5 about the wife and husband. Many times I was told, I was thinking, love your wife and wife to submit to your husband. I think usually we blame ourselves for the lack of submission on their part because of our lack of love. I think, right now while I was sitting, I think we have to spare the men. We have to release the men from saying that this is, conditional. That just because you don't love the submission. I was thinking Jesus loved everyone. Very few submitted to Jesus. So I think this is independent. Whether my wife submits to me or not, I'm supposed to love. Whether I love her or not, she's supposed to submit. That is my take.
Okay. Yeah, so the Ephesians 5 and that whole subject, I mean, yeah, that surely could be a fun discussion for us all, but I appreciate those comments. In terms of the single thing, I think that's open to a lot of answers too, a lot of ways you can answer, but I can easily answer publicly, and I'm ready for an answer publicly that's something that drives me. And a root cause, and it really does go way back to Genesis, is a distorted understanding of self-interest. This has changed us dramatically. We don't know who we are, so our sense of personhood, the bearers of the image of God, created by God, male and female, He created them. That is misunderstood or not even believed or ignored today. And then the self-interest that even is rampant in the community of faith, where we have become comfortable with a compartmentalized life. That the way, my church life, my work life, my home life, my racquetball club life, all these things are allowed to exist without being integrated together. And I know this is true for young men, they're very comfortable with a compartmented life. So the call that I am inspired by, it comes right out of Psalm 86:11, when David prayed that God would give him a single heart. The single-hearted devotion to God is I think the great need of our time. Integrity is something that everybody likes. I mean, even the world is going to celebrate the value of integrity. But what does integrity really mean? Well, it comes from the same root word of integrate. Now think of this, all the parts of your life. One way to explain integrity is the integration of all parts of your life. Who you are on the inside and the outside, who you are at home, when the door's shut, who you are in the public place. I am so concerned about the disintegration of our lives. And I see this with young men all the time. Many of them, I do have a Facebook page because it's a way I connect with a lot of deerfooters. Many of them will post, sometimes, I shouldn't say many of them, it's not that rampant, but occasionally I'll have a guy who posts something that I think is inappropriate. And I try not to be the Facebook police, but I can't help myself sometimes. So I'll send him a message, and let's just make up a name. I'll say, Jim, when you posted that picture, what do you think that communicated about who you are as a man of God? And he's like, it was just no big deal. I didn't mean to communicate. But you see, what's happening here is he doesn't get how behavior at this event is still integrated with his profession over here. And he's got campers who are friends with him on Facebook. So I have to tell them, everything you post on there, you're still Chief Jim, the counselor at camp. They haven't said, oh, well, that's his school life. Because their assumption, rightfully so, is that the man who professes to be a fully devoted follower of Christ at camp is, in fact, a fully devoted follower of Christ at Penn State. And that is a rightful expectation, but a lot of people just don't quite get that. They want space. We do this nationally. A few years ago, we had a president who was found to have some incredible, really perverse, immoral lapse in the White House. And the great argument of our time was his personal life has nothing to do with his public life. And that argument won. People were comfortable with the disintegration. And it happens all the time. Well, you can't, give him his home life space. Nobody's perfect. We're all sinners. Yes, we are, and by the grace of God, His blood covers. I was so appreciated our service this morning. But for me, this unraveling of wholeness is the thing I'm most concerned about. I think a lot of people could answer it differently, though.
I'm going to, only because when those kids start opening the door, they taught me a lesson when they said, he's still talking.
I hear that a lot.
I still remember that. Ron, I want to thank you for coming, and I think it's helpful for us to think outside of it. It may not be directly in our own families right now, but it's the world that our kids live in, and the world our kids are growing up in. And Ron has got a passion, and he really leads the board as a leadership. And he didn't mention, but we're trying to put in a year-round program now where we continue to follow up with our leaders, the counselors and that, and trying to hold them accountable and where are you and stuff like that. Because you don't all of a sudden become a godly young man. I mean, a godly man.
Right.
And many of them fall by the wayside. So anyway, Ron, I want to thank you. I'll ask you to continue to pray for Deerfoot.
Please.
It's really a special ministry. It really is. And I never went there, but I'm blessed to be part of it. That's all. Let's just close in word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father.